a very clear occasion on this country when one of our soldiers was murdered on our streets, where clearly scripture had something to do with it. So the problem that a lot of us have is we are willing to discuss the drugs bit, we're willing to discuss the foreign policy bit, we're willing to discuss all this. Why are you not willing to concede that there is a religious element?
Douglas Murray eviscerates the opposition in a debate so intense it's practically on fire. In this epic showdown, Murray dismantles a Muslim girl's arguments with surgical precision, using her own logic against her in a breathtaking display of intellectual dominance. Brace yourself for a debate that's nothing short of a thunderstorm of argument and wit.
Islamic State has said for some years that since various cells in the West have found it very hard to get hold of the technology to make bombs in recent years, they've been disrupted from doing so. Since it's very hard in the UK, for instance, to get hold of Kalashnikov rifles, ISIS has called on people in countries like this who follow their message to carry out attacks using vehicles, very low-grade attacks, knives, you know, this sort of thing. So that's why it fits a pattern of ISIS-inspired attacks. So we'll find out exactly, or some more of what motivated him in the days and weeks and months to come. As for the question of publicity, this is a huge question which we're always wondering about. This was a good week, after all, wasn't it, to wonder about terrorism and our attitude towards it in general. Martin McGuinness, I think responsible for more deaths than anybody else in the UK in recent decades, died and was eulogised in the House of Commons. 24 hours later, the House of Commons was attacked by another type of terrorism. But I think this is a very bad sign for this country. The way in which we treat terrorists of the past tells us how we will treat terrorists of the future.
Murray argues that ISIS, facing difficulties in obtaining advanced weaponry, has shifted to using simpler methods like vehicles and knives for attacks. He connects this to the broader issue of how terrorism is publicly handled, using the contrasting responses to Martin McGuinness's eulogy and a subsequent attack on the House of Commons to highlight the potential consequences. Murray contends that the way past terrorists are treated influences how future threats are managed, suggesting that inconsistent or lenient responses could impact national security.
It's really important, and as a role as a journalist, that you do your job and you do it well. So that goes back to the accuracy, that there was misinformation pledged out this week, and the problem is social media is so quick. So where certain outlets or networks have taken their time to fact check and get the accuracy, and they've delivered to the public that news. That is our duty first and foremost as journalists, to do a job and do it well. The problem is, and it's across all sectors, so that's broadcast, print, digital, online, we abide by editorial guidelines, and it's so important because when we don't, it undermines our credibility and the work that we do. And it really does, and it's a mockery of the job that we do. And our job is to serve the public, and our job is to give the correct information.
Well, there's the photograph of the woman with the hijab on social media crossing Westminster Bridge, and from afar it looked like she was ignoring the tragedy unfolding around her and being, heartless. But if you actually looked at the closer photograph, it was of her face. She was extremely distraught, and she was possibly phoning for help, or she was phoning to tell
she's issued a statement.
Her friends
I don't
and
know
family.
if you're familiar, but she's issued a statement.
Yeah,
she has issued a statement, and the photographers actually released the other photographs around
she had helped people.
Image.
Indeed so.
I think anybody in that frame of mind, at that position, I can't imagine anybody walking away from something like that. That's not a sense of humanity.
Saba, a Muslim journalist, emphasizes the crucial role of journalists in maintaining accuracy and ethical standards, especially in the fast-paced world of social media. She argues that misinformation spreads rapidly, often leading to harmful narratives, as demonstrated by the misjudgment of a woman in a hijab on Westminster Bridge. Initially portrayed as indifferent to the tragedy around her, a closer examination revealed her distress and likely attempts to seek help. Saba's point underscores the need for thorough fact-checking to avoid misleading the public and maintain the credibility of the media, particularly during sensitive events.
This is huge, don't you think, Douglas? This is hugely counterproductive, because then you are adding to the feeling in communities that they are being persecuted and they are being stigmatized. And then that adds to their agenda the demonisation of Britain. So it's a feedback loop, isn't it?
But I don't think we've got into that. I don't think that's been what's happening. I think it's been very, very...
Has it been happening?
I think it's been very...
EDL
hasn't been
huge statements.
What are you talking about the EDL for? I mean, I'm talking about our society as a whole, okay? In our society as a whole and our media as a whole, there has not been any crazy response to this. The media, by and large, has done its job. It's been fairly restrained. I agree that there is a time, definitely, for all of the discussions that have come up already. By the way, quickly on this thing about motive, and I think we shouldn't attribute motive until we know, but we should certainly look into the cases where drugs have been involved. I think it's long overdue to consider that. I also think we're long overdue to consider the role that religion can play in these attacks as well. These are not mutually exclusive. You know, there are many people who have carried out Islamist attacks who have been, you know, eating pork, drinking and so on, and then do what they do precisely as an act of, as it were, religious purification. That's very common. So these things are not, I mean, the 9/11 hijackers went to strip bars and all that kind of, you know, I mean, these things are not exclusive. They're a very, very complex picture that leads somebody to carry out this sort of thing. But I do, you know, we should be having a wide-ranging discussion on it. Thankfully on this programme we can, but quite often in our media and elsewhere we don't have as wide-ranging a discussion as we should, and our politicians in particular are clearly terrified of aspects of this discussion.
Murray's argument wildly oversimplifies terrorism by pinning the blame on Islam, completely ignoring the real drivers like political grievances, socio-economic struggles, and mental health issues that fuel radicalization. His assertion that the media has been restrained? Nonsense. The media overwhelmingly targets Muslim perpetrators, reinforcing dangerous stereotypes. Murray's narrow focus on religion doesn't just miss the point, it risks alienating peaceful Muslim communities and handing extremists exactly what they want: division.
What are they we're open, we're honest, we have a frank exchange of views. What are our politicians scared of saying?
Well, first of all, they're scared of saying, actually, you know, I mean, the amount of people proclaiming this week, you know, we will not allow this to change our society. I mean, who on earth thought it would? I mean, who thought that a guy with a knife and a car was going to bring down British democracy and cause the Queen to abdicate and put the flag of Islam over Buckingham Palace?
But,
I mean, really.
But Douglas,
you know.
Douglas, one of the things which has happened ever since the terrorist attacks during the Blair era is that governments have used these attacks as a pretext to take away important liberties. Yeah. And Benjamin Franklin said long ago that if you sacrifice your liberty for temporary security, you'll end up having neither liberty nor security. But our governments have flagrantly ignored this: longer detention periods without trial, more intrusion, more snooping.
Is that a danger, Douglas?
This has changed our society. What politicians are very much afraid of is that people will discover how very little power they have to prevent these attacks.
Murray and Peter both miss the mark in their arguments. Murray downplays the real societal impact of terrorism, mocking the idea that attacks could significantly alter British society while ignoring how terrorism fosters fear, division, and reactive policies that fuel extremist narratives. Peter, on the other hand, exaggerates the notion that governments use terrorism as a pretext to strip away liberties, overlooking the complex balance between security and civil rights in response to genuine threats. Both perspectives fail to address the nuanced reality of counterterrorism, which requires safeguarding both public safety and civil liberties without succumbing to fear or authoritarianism.
Quite finished. What do you think about what we heard from so many people? We will not be cowed. What did you think about that?
I mean, it's a very good thing that people think that and say that. But I mean, I think some of the response to this, I mean, this was not the Blitz. This was not a sustained night after night campaign. It was one attack, a brutal, horrible attack in the heart of London. But and to that extent, sort of emotionally, and I agree with what Peter wrote this morning, we have to be careful not to be overreacting.
A policeman was killed, and when a policeman is killed, Keith Palmer, it always strikes at the heart, doesn't it?
And people, and our society says and has said very clearly.
But Nicky,
Murray and Peter again both downplay the real impact of terrorism by minimizing the emotional toll of attacks. Murray dismisses the significance of a single attack, comparing it to the Blitz. But even one brutal incident in a symbolic location like London has the power to instill widespread fear and disrupt society. Hitchens' comparison to the IRA bombings also misses the mark, as modern terrorism's unpredictability and media amplification make its psychological impact much more profound. Both arguments overlook the fact that terrorism's power lies not in the frequency or scale of attacks, but in its ability to provoke fear and destabilize societies.
Then they're actually contradicting what they're saying.
Who is?
Douglas, because on the one hand, you're saying, look, we don't want to cower to the terrorists, we don't want to be singing their agenda, and yet the first thing everybody uses is the word Islam. Well, listen, in this particular state, I was actually in Scotland Yard on this case, so I was there on the day. To qualify as an Islamist incident, it has to fit a certain criteria. And it was discussed earlier on, but no one actually mentioned why this was classed and why it was taken over by SO15 as an Islamic incident. Otherwise, it would have just been homicide that would have taken over this case. There are certain criteria. For instance, if he said the word Allahu Akbar, that would have been clearly an Islamist incident. If he had had a flag of ISIS, clearly it would have been Islamic. He didn't have any of those. He didn't say anything. He didn't leave a note. The only thing that makes this a counter-terrorism
he was a Muslim.
No, not even that. It was because he wasn't. We don't know if he was a practicing Muslim, because he clearly wasn't a very good Muslim. What
does that mean? What does a very good Muslim mean?
Well, if he was taking cocaine, he was into wife bashing, all those things. If he was a Muslim, he wouldn't be taking cocaine and having drinking alcohol. But it was because he attacked. Let me just finish the point. The reason was because he attacked a political institution, the heart of government. That was one of the reasons, if you like, that qualified it. He's in terms of practicing, that's still coming out.
Mohammed Khalil, a Muslim debater, delivers a powerful critique of the knee-jerk association of terrorism with Islam. He highlights that, for an attack to be labeled Islamist terrorism, it must meet strict criteria, like using extremist symbols or language, which were notably missing in the case he discusses. The real reason it was classified as terrorism? It targeted a political institution, not because of any genuine Islamic extremism. Khalil's point smashes the unfair stereotype that ties terrorism to Muslim identity, showing that this dangerous overreach obscures the real motives behind the attack and unjustly stigmatizes Muslims.
Well, you've just said what you think. You've just given us your view, which is that it's nothing to do with Islam. And other people will have a view that it is. But I'm suggesting that as a society, we actually take the time to work out people's motives. But it's very clear that in your case, for instance, you wouldn't want it to be ascribed to an Islamic motive. Even if it was turned out that he had a copy of the Quran in the car, you would say it had nothing to do with Islam.
We would have accepted that.
There are people, let me finish the point. And there are people who would say it has something to do with Islam, even if it's very clear that it has nothing to do with Islam. But there are, in this whole thing, my simple point is that we should be looking at the motives, and at the moment there are parts of the anti-terrorism and counter-extremism strategy where the government is, and politicians are very worried about treading on it. And you saw it, as was mentioned earlier, in Theresa May's comments in the House this week, where she immediately ruled one aspect of this whole thing out.
Murray's viewpoint is flawed because it oversimplifies the complex issue of terrorism by focusing narrowly on whether an attack can be linked to Islam. His perspective ignores the need for a nuanced analysis of motives beyond just religious identity. By fixating on Islam as a primary factor, Murray overlooks how diverse motivations, political, personal, or ideological, play a significant role in such attacks. Moreover, his criticism of the government's cautious approach to counter-extremism strategies fails to recognize that understanding the true motives behind terrorism requires careful consideration of all influencing factors, not just immediate religious associations.
When you speak about journalism and accuracy, of course, and we all want the truth. It's not just you.
I disagree
it's me.
That we all want the truth.
Okay, so let me tell you for myself, and I can speak on behalf of perhaps 99% of the British Muslim public, that generally none of us know the motives behind people who carry out these acts. I myself am very much part of this society. I'm born and raised a Londoner. I'm an observant Muslim, and you don't see somebody like me carrying out these acts inspired by my faith. Therefore,
that doesn't mean that the people who do
I'm not saying I'm not, and people are analysing scripture. It's not whether it's the Quran or the biblical scripture. You seem to be quite hung up on the fact that this is a Quranic scriptural point.
Scriptures are open to interpretation, and literally.
If they're not quoting scripture, why are we bringing scripture into this? If they're not quoting scripture,
because a lot of them quote.
scripture.
Because a lot of them quote the verses that say, find the infidels, root them out and kill them.
Saba's point strikes at the heart of the debate. She passionately asserts that the vast majority of British Muslims, including herself, are baffled by the motives behind terrorist acts, firmly rejecting the idea that faith drives such violence. As an observant Muslim and a Londoner, she underscores that her religion is not a breeding ground for extremism. Instead, she exposes how terrorists twist religious texts to fit their twisted agendas, which is a gross misrepresentation of Islam. This distortion fuels harmful stereotypes and unfairly targets the entire Muslim community. Saba's argument calls for a deeper, more accurate understanding of terrorism, one that rejects simplistic and erroneous links to religion.
Come on. This is a great example of it right here. Mr. Al-Andalusi thinks that none of the terrorists ever quote the Quran. Flat out wrong. Flat out wrong. Let me give you one example. You mentioned it earlier, the killers of Lee Rigby. Michael Adebolajo, on his body, when the police arrested him, he had a note in his pocket to his young daughter explaining why he did what he did. It's all on the public record. You can see the facsimile on the BBC's website, and he has footnotes throughout it of Quranic verses that he explains justify, in his view, his actions. Now, that's the beginning. Hang on, let me just finish my point before the proselytization begins, okay? Let me just finish my point. That would seem to me to be, therefore, a very clear occasion, never mind the thousands of others we could list worldwide, a very clear occasion on this country when one of our soldiers was murdered on our streets, where clearly Scripture had something to do with it. So the problem that a lot of us have is we are willing to discuss the drugs bit, we're willing to discuss the foreign policy bit, we're willing to discuss all this. Why are you not willing to concede that there is a religious element?
Just because some terrorists use religious texts to justify their actions doesn't mean Islam itself is to blame. Many extremists distort religious teachings to fit their radical agendas, a practice that doesn't reflect the faith's true values. Moreover, focusing solely on the religious elements overlooks other critical factors, such as political grievances, social alienation, and psychological issues. Terrorism is multifaceted, and reducing it to a religious issue simplifies and misrepresents its causes, unfairly targeting an entire faith and ignoring the broader context of radicalization.
A lot of speculation because we have the 24-hour news culture. However, there are things about that are unhealthy, but it's nothing like as unhealthy as the fact that if you look back, as I said at the start, about our attitude to terror of the past and our attitude to terror present, when the IRA killed MPs and many policemen and many soldiers, what did we end up doing? We ended up putting the people who had orchestrated that campaign at the heart of government. And that is far sicker. The idea that 20 years from now, anyone who was associated with Khalid Massoud would be put into power, that's far more of a societal sickness than 24-hour news media.
Saba, I'm going to give you the last word, Saba. We've got another debate coming with very interesting people to talk about it, and it's a fascinating topic. But generally speaking, the coverage of this week, has it been self-defeating in that it has given unnecessary oxygen to those people who would destroy us, or has it ultimately been responsible and the right way to cover it?
It's a double-edged sword. I think overall it's been quite responsible. However, there have been some tabloids and some news that has gone out, as we all are aware, that has been misinformation, and things such as, Birmingham is the jihadist capital of England, that's not helpful unless it's backed up by evidence.
It is.
And
it's actually not the capital, it's the second capital of terror.
London is the capital.
London is the capital of terror in the UK, Birmingham is second.
Debatable.
No. If you look at the stats, released earlier this month, it proves that.
Murray's comparison of past IRA integrations to current media coverage misses the point. While integrating former IRA members aimed at peace, today's media often spreads misinformation and sensationalizes terrorism, as Saba rightly critiques. She emphasizes that focusing on religious identity in terrorism coverage unfairly stigmatizes Islam and distracts from the broader, more complex issues of radicalization. Saba's call for responsible and nuanced reporting addresses the real dangers of media sensationalism. This debate ignites a powerful truth. Terrorism is a perversion of Islam, not a reflection of it. Saba's fiery rebuttal slams the door on the myth that Islam fuels violence, showcasing instead the faith's true message of peace and justice. Extremists twist religious teachings to fit their own vile agendas, but that's a far cry from what Islam truly represents. By focusing narrowly on religion, we only fuel dangerous stereotypes and miss the real drivers of radicalization. If you love the sparks flying in this debate, smash that like button, share the fire with friends, subscribe for more epic content, and drop your thoughts in the comments below.